Hello, widowhood. Our guest today is a lawyer from Pennsylvania. Her name is Michelle Farley, and she is going to cover some essential topics that are very critical in dealing with grief and the loss of a loved one. Let's get into the conversation now.
Many people talk about the ups and downs of married life, but no one really prepares you for life after your spouse passes away. Welcome to Widowhood Real Talk with Tina, a safe place for widows, widowers, and their friends and family to talk about love and loss. Find comfort as you listen to honest conversations between Tina and invited guests who've experienced the loss of their forever partner. Share their stories of love, grief, and healing. You are not alone in this journey. Join today's episode and discover a wealth of resources and learn how to connect with others who are traveling the same path. This is Widowhood Real Talk with Tina.
Hello, widowhood. Today, our guest is a lawyer from Pennsylvania. Her name is Michelle Farley. And I want to be specific in the idea that she has legal information to share with us, but she is also speaking from the perspective of law as it relates to the state of Pennsylvania. This information is going to be helpful because this will give you that cornerstone of information to broaden out to reach with your local lawyer and find out where you need to go and what you need to do. So this will be a jump off point for you. So welcome, Michelle Farley.
Tina, thank you so much for inviting me to the podcast. I'm just thrilled to have the opportunity. Tina, you're well aware you and I go way back in time, and I'm going to introduce myself, and then I'm going to explain a little bit about our background in terms of how we know each other. Okay,
She
so
braces herself.
my name is Michelle Farley. I'm a 58-year-old attorney currently practicing in the Pocono Mountains of Pennsylvania. That's Monroe County, Pennsylvania. This is where Tina lived not too long ago. Of course, I have to give the disclaimer that we have not formed the attorney-client relationship between me and the audience. And also, I'm not giving specific legal advice to anyone in your audience, but rather this is general information, which I'm hoping that your listeners, will find helpful. So with that, can I go into a little bit of my background, Tina?
Yes, ma'am. She has a
Oh,
yes.
okay. So I have been an attorney, shockingly, for 33 years now. I'm in my 33 years of
Wow.
practicing. It's hard for me to believe. Basic summary of my practice, and I won't go into too much detail, but after college, I attended law school at New York University. My first job was clerking for a federal judge in Baltimore. When somebody knows they want to be a courtroom lawyer, usually the best first job is to work for a judge so you can see other lawyers in action, and that's what I did. From there, I joined a huge law firm in Washington, D.C., and at that time, there were over 1,000 lawyers in private practice there. And interestingly, during the time that I worked there, there was a young partner there named John Roberts. He's currently the Chief Justice of the U.S. Supreme Court. So it was sort of where a lot of the movers and shakers were at that time, right in the thick of things in Washington, D.C. And I was there for about 6 years, getting my feet under me, getting some good training, learning from older lawyers. And then I moved to the Pocono Mountains of Pennsylvania after getting married. My husband and I wanted to be in sort of a more rural country area. And he actually identified the Pocono Mountains of Pennsylvania as a good spot. And as Tina knows, my husband was a big hunter and fisherman, so he wanted to be in the woods somewhere, and Pocono Mountains fit the bill. So for a couple of years, I didn't practice law. I actually worked as an environmental project manager in a non-legal position. But then I did open my own office in 1999 in Pennsylvania after passing the bar examination and getting licensed here. I think I met Tina around 2003 or 2004. Is that right, Tina?
I want to say it was right around 2000. And can I say how we met, or are you going to share that part?
You can say.
So, Catherine was starting kindergarten in the Pocono. So we had recently just relocated from Virginia to Pennsylvania. We went to Pennsylvania because our children were young and Mark was from Bloomsburg. And it was a good opportunity for the children to be close to his family. And also, Mark was working in New York as an International Brotherhood of Electrical Worker electrician. And the time had come for Catherine to go to school. And I thought that this part I really thought was very interesting for the area, that they allowed the parents to ride the bus route that their children would go on. So you would, be acclimated to your child's route. And I had been staying home. When I got on the bus, we make assessments of everything. And I looked at a few ladies in the back and they looked kind of cliquish and they looked like, to me, some stay-at-home moms, which I was, but I was in transition. But I looked at Michelle and she was sitting there. I think she had on a suit, but if she had that demeanor, I was like, she's my people. And I went and sat next to her and started chatting up a little bit, because you didn't want to just sit by yourself. And she was sitting there just so proper and just back straight, and she's tall. Michelle is tall. You cannot see this. And her family is tall. And so I'm like, yes, tall women, and they're looking professional. So I was like, I'm right here. This is who I'm sitting next to.
Tina and I chose each other. We just had the same energy. Tina was a tax professional at the time, and I was starting my own law office. And so we developed a friendship immediately, I would say, because of the kids. And also we were drawn to each other. We're both, I'm 6 feet, you're just about 6 feet, and tall, athletic. We both have athletic background.
Yes.
And we were drawn to each other, but our children, interestingly, were exactly the same age. We
Yes.
both have a boy and a girl. Your girl's older, my boy's older, but they were in the same grade in the school. So that was interesting. And so we clicked right away. Now, so I'm going to say from 1999 until about 2012, I had my own law office in Cresco, Pennsylvania. And for a lot of that time, Tina served as the bookkeeper for my office as well, which was interesting because we managed to have a professional relationship and be friends, and our children were friendly. So we have some interesting stories, Tina and I, and one of them is that the first house that Tina lived in the Poconos,
Oh my gosh.
because of where it was situated, if there was a heavy, heavy, heavy storm, she found out the hard way that
Ah,
the basement, which was a finished play area, was going to flood. And I remember getting that call, and she said, girl, there is 3 feet of water. And I think Mark was away. And
yes.
I said, I'm coming to get the kids, pack the bags. And they came and stayed over because she was concerned about keeping her eye on the water, moving belongings up and out of the water, and it was a mess. So then eventually she moved beyond that house, and our
Oh,
relationship
no, no,
just
no, no, no. We called that the Farley Farnwall flood something event. It was like a whole name that the children had about that. They're
yeah.
all excited that they get to play, and I'm over here freaking out. There's like the Farley Farnwall flood event. I'm like, why are we naming things? They had a good time with that. I totally forgot about that.
Oh, we have a lot of memories, you and I. So from I'm going back and forth to my Tina history, to my law history, general time
But I want to
frames.
say this. So literally, just for perspective, I rented some office space. So it was down the road from Michelle. Then I eventually purchased a building. So our practices were very close in proximity. So if I had someone that needed legal assistance, I would send them down to Michelle. If she had clients that needed accounting, bookkeeping, tax services. So it really worked well. And when I did leave, and hopefully I don't mess up, but when I left Pennsylvania, I had this desk that was just beautiful. And Michelle would come down, she would talk to me in business. It's like she was dating my desk. She would come down and say like how nice it was. And then when I left, she took it. And I was so glad to give that to her. When I was go down a couple of times before I left and saw it in her office, I was like, oh, it looks so nice right here.
That was a historic handmade desk, handmade by a cabinet maker in Stroudsburg, Pennsylvania, which
Oh
is our
wow.
county seat. And his label I located underneath the bottom of one of the
Wow.
drawers when I closed my office. we delivered that desk to the Monroe County Courthouse, and I believe it's in the Monroe County Courthouse to this day.
Get out of here.
I guess I never told you that. Yes.
No,
Yes,
wow.
that was a beautiful desk. So thank
I don't
you.
even know how I came across that, how that
Yeah.
even happened.
Yeah, that was an
Wow.
enormous desk. So, so a little bit more about my background. I want to tell the listeners something about what type of law I did so they can understand. One of the reasons you would have asked me to be here is that I was a general civil litigation attorney when I left Washington, D.C., doing sort of business disputes because I was at a very large firm. But when I came to a small town, I had to adjust what types of litigation were there. So there were evictions. So I started doing that. There were divorces. I started doing that. And there was probate, the legal
Yes.
process after someone dies. So I started doing that. I took a lot of continuing legal ed classes. I worked under some local attorneys who were very skilled in probate litigation, and I really learned the process from the ground up. And when you practice law in a small town, that's what you have to do. You become a jack of all trades, but you have to be careful and be good at each one of them. Otherwise, that's a danger.
So, Michelle,
So
you mentioned probate. Is that also the umbrella that one would connect that with wills and trusts? Do they kind of fall in the same umbrella?
that so this is how we use the nomenclature. If you're coming to me to prepare your will, we call that trust and estate work.
Okay.
If the person has already passed and you're in shock and you're coming to me, what do I do now legally? That's the probate process.
Okay.
And I'm going to jump into that a little
No,
bit
no, I just,
here.
as you mentioned it, I wanted to, no, no, go ahead with that. That's fine. I just wanted, as you were saying that, because I know people will be thinking, how does that relate? No, no, thank you.
So after I did my own practice around 2011, 2012, I started thinking, I really like to go back with a firm. So I located a firm locally, which at the time was the largest firm in our area. They had 4 offices, but we're in a very small area. So there were only 5 or 6 lawyers. I think I was the 6th lawyer. I joined Fisher and Fisher law offices. And I was with them for 11 years. And I left them this past summer, um, really to have more time to help and assist my parents who were both getting older and dealing with some health issues, and my stepmom as well, and just some other family things that I needed time for. So now since then, since last summer, I've formed my own LLC again. I have all my licensing and insurance, so I'm back up and running, and we really don't have enough lawyers in our area, so people are finding.
So, Michelle,
Um,
as you're adjusting your notes, if someone wanted to work with you and they're in the Pennsylvania area and they need a Pennsylvania lawyer, what is the name of your firm now? How would they find you?
Farley Law LLC, and the website is www.farleylawllc.com.
Okay, and those will be in the notes too, but I just want to
Yes.
mention that now. Thank you.
Yep. And the best way for someone to make a first contact with me is actually email, so it's searchable in my inbox.
Okay,
Um, and that would be Farley Law 01 at outlook.com.
thank you.
Okay,
And we'll have those in the blogs and the show notes too. Thank you.
no problem. Now, I had mentioned that I had started doing probate work. I had started doing estate planning. I had learned the required pieces to prepare someone's last will and testament. I may have assisted Tina and Mark in doing their
Mm,
wills. I
yep.
can't even remember. I did. Okay.
Yep. You did Mark's mother's will.
Oh,
Um, and you also did the will for Mark and I, and you did assist me with some probate because we had found that there was one item that Mark forgot to name me as. No one else was named, just to be clear, but we had to do that, and that was a very small piece. We were pretty good with all the documentation.
so jumping into that time frame after Mark's passing, I mean, of course, this was really a shocking event. It happened suddenly. I'll never forget when Tina called me and let me know. I was standing in my kitchen. I was in absolute shock. And also it really the shock poured over into my practice because I think up until that point, I had really only dealt with elders passing.
Okay.
And Mark was not an elder, and it really opened my eyes that wow, someone could pass at that young age.
Mm-hmm.
And it just his passing changed so many people's lives. It was just, the ripple effect of people that were affected. It
Mm-hmm.
was really an unbelievable thing.
And I want to say this. So not only did so Michelle was at my house. So I mean, I want you to know, like she was at my house. She's bringing food. She's trying to bring, like she'll whip up. Now I don't know if we'll get any of her impersonations, but Michelle is really good at that and very funny. But we may not do that now because she's got her legal mind on. But my girlfriend Michelle, she'll start cooking up something right away and bringing it. So there was a story that I share about the pearl necklace that Catherine gave me, and I think you were there when Catherine gave that to me that day and said that this was a necklace that Mark had and had been keeping it. So there were a lot of different parts in my life, like Michelle and I, front and center. When I was recovering from cancer, we were going for walks together. Now, this is, as she says, we're athletic. This is someone she knew just would go out running with Alexander for in the morning for just like a 2 or 3 mile run. And now to see her friend, that could barely walk to the mailbox at the
Yeah,
end of the block and
yeah.
then walk back. So she has seen me in so many states and knows me truly from just so many different angles.
When I was preparing for this teen, I completely forgot about your cancer.
Oh,
Completely
I
forgot
know because
about it
that was
because
the biggest thing that Mark died. That made everything else like,
yeah, yeah, there was a lot going on in your life. And I remember one time, your transportation to your cancer treatment canceled and you
oh, you
called
took
me.
me.
Yeah, yeah. You you have a big circle of friends, and so those are, among your blessings. But I was happy to do that, and I don't want to get emotional. So
But I'll say this, you are right, and I am truly blessed, and that's why when I start talking to other people who are widows and widowers, and they were telling me they had nobody, that
right,
after a short period of time, people would tell them, "Why are you still talking about that? Why are you still sad?" And you are a testament to that, that not a single friend, as I am now going into the 7th year of Mark's passing, has ever told me, "Why are you talking about him?"
right,
And, how I've had people say, like, "How could you have gotten remarried?" And you were somebody that has seen me through this journey, like, you know how much you saw me in love with Mark every day, saw me love him, and yet still celebrated as I continued living and found
right.
a new love. And just that transparency in our relationship. So I am blessed. But I mean, and when she took me, let's be clear, she picked me up, I fell asleep. I fell
Right.
asleep going and fell asleep coming
Yeah,
back because
yeah,
I was exhausted from the
right,
treatment. I forgot
right.
about that part.
Well, I
Yeah.
don't stop talking often, and on that ride back, I kept telling stories, and I would look over. Oh, she's sleeping again. She's sleeping again. So I do have one funny story
Here
in
we
my
go.
notes that I'm going to share. I was going to
Yes.
say Tina and I did not discuss this prior, but 5 minutes ago before we started, she
So
asked
I
me if I
have
was
not
going to
signed
tell.
an approval for this statement.
I have obtained all releases to tell this story. So one of the things that Tina was good at doing was recognizing when she needed to connect with girlfriends during
Mm,
her phase of grief. She had some really good friends and neighbors. Dawn next door, and
yes.
I came over. You invited Dawn, you invited me, you invited another woman, and we had girls' movie night, and we slept over.
I, oh
Yes, we did.
wow.
Yes, we did.
Wow.
Because I think we were drinking wine and you said, I don't want you girls going home, so pack your bag. Now, Dawn didn't stay over because she lived right next
Well,
door
she
and
could
walked.
walk next door.
Right.
Yes.
But you didn't want me getting in the car, so I stayed over. I remember that. Now, this is the real funny story. Once, and Tina was very good about organizing activities and trying to connect and keep herself busy. So one thing she did was she ordered the food that comes in a box with all the ingredients
Yes.
and you prepare the food once it arrives. So she said, come on over. It's a meal for two. We're going to make this meal. So I go over there and we open the box and we open the ingredients. Ooh, look at this and look at this and look at this. Let's keep reading the directions. And we must have read those directions 5 times. And each thing we did it just as it was supposed to be. And all of a sudden, we're starting to smell something that smells kind of burnt. And it's like, wait a minute. Tina said, my oven works. It's true to temperature. I don't know what is going on. Why does it smell like that? And don't you know, the alarm, the fire, the smoke alarm goes off. And then into her driveway pulls 2 local volunteer firemen. And they weren't in a fire truck. They were in like a station wagon or something crazy. And because it's a small town, I knew who the guys were. I forget who it was, but I dressed them by name. They were surprised to see me come out of her house. And we were laughing. We had been drinking wine, and they didn't believe us that there was no fire. And when we said, oh, we just burned dinner, they said, are you sure? Is this all right? What's going on here? We couldn't stop laughing. They didn't want to leave. And we finally said, go, just go. We're fine. And we ate that dinner and it was fine.
Yes. Oh my
And,
gosh. Ah,
but that got us laughing, as it does now to this day. And the laughing was good. And Tina was smart enough to know when she needed to connect. And she wasn't afraid to reach out to her friends and say, I need a night with you. You're coming over. And, friends are very scared in general, I think, to reach out to the new widow. Everybody's, ooh, hands off. I don't know what she's thinking. If she's not thinking about his death, I don't want to remind her of his death. So this is how the friends think. So Tina was better than most in this process, I think, because, well, first of all, she's educated, intelligent woman. She knew and she's in touch with her emotions. She knew what she needed, and she wasn't afraid to ask her friends for that.
okay. Thank you. And I am grateful for you sharing that because when I talk to people about this process, my 3 elements are: 1, check in with yourself. And if you're checking in with yourself and you're seeing that you're at a lull, that you're seeing you're stuck, if you're seeing that you are in a place that you don't want to be in, the second step is community. That community may be your journal. That community may be your mental health professional. That community may be your friends and family. But when you make that first step of that assessment and you realize you can't handle this, then you need to reach out to community because the people that love you are waiting and they don't know what to do. And sometimes you
Right.
have to guide them. And once you give them that openness, then they know, okay, this is how I can show up because they're kind of waiting on the edge, like on the
Yes.
sideline, put me in, coach, I'm ready, but I don't know what to do. And once I gave them that opportunity, the third step is moving. That movement is engaging. Okay, I need you to come over, and after I did that, they were fine to check in if it had been a while. It's like, I know now I have permission to check in on her and ask how she's doing because I did that. So those 3 steps is literally what I was doing from the beginning, being in touch with my own emotions, engage in community, and then deciding how to move and make that work to get me out of that spot. Wow, I forgot about the sleepovers. That was so fun.
It was.
Um,
It was a great idea. So let me transition into discussing a couple of basics. You already just did this transition for me. Transition about talking about the basics about grief. And I say these things with full knowledge that many of your listeners have gone through this in a way that I have not. So I will say that Mark's passing really, as I said, was something that affected so many people and really got people thinking. This could happen so suddenly. So many people contacted me to have their wills done after his passing because
really?
because they were thinking about it for the first time. Now, this is like a very general thing, but you know the phrase, nobody's going to get out of here alive. I mean, that's a way of saying we're all going to die. And
Yes.
I mean, the first time I heard that phrase, it was like, whoa. Sometimes you're not ready to hear that phrase. I think most of us go through life thinking, and certainly I did until Mark's passing, I have longevity in my family. People do not die young. They live into their upper 80s. And so I've always thought, well, I don't smoke. I eat right. I don't go skydiving. My husband has and wants to go again. I don't do these things. I live a pretty safe life. So I'll be fine and I'm going to live a long time. But, we can't really think that way. That's a dangerous way to think. So many of your listeners are widows or widowers. Perhaps some listeners have lost a child or a sibling at a younger age. I tend to think that, and again, I'm just speaking sort of in America, in my experience, if someone dies above an age that we feel is older or elderly, people don't think anything of it. And I'm going to draw a line at 70. You hear of somebody over 70 who dies, we're not shocked. We're sad. We're sad, but we're not shocked. But there are people that have lost someone, as you have, much younger. There are people that have lost a young child. There are people that have lost a twin. I mean,
Mm,
when you really get into the issue of grief and loss, it's a very deep issue.
yes.
Um, and preparing for this podcast had me thinking about some loss that I've experienced. And I thought about my mother-in-law, who I was extremely close with. She came and lived with me and my husband, and we were her primary caretakers for the last 2.5 years of her life. And I would say really I was the primary caretaker because his job forced him to travel a lot. And he agrees with that I was the primary caretaker, even to the tasks of daily care, feeding her, bathing her, cleaning her after the messes. I mean, we got down to the nitty gritty.
And you were.
Um,
I remember sometimes wanting to go do something and not, and I want to just say this. You loved her. You
yes,
loved on her. You were not just doing it to check a block for your husband. You were loving that woman like it was your own mother. And I watched you do that without any hesitation. It was like, okay, well, it's not working where she's at. We need to move her here. And you were head into doing that. I just watched that in awe.
I learned a lot during that process. I appreciate you saying that, Tina. My mother-in-law had dementia. We didn't know what it was at first. I unfortunately became an expert in dementia care, and it started with moving her out of our house into one of our rental properties when she wasn't too bad off yet, and then adding in 4 hours a day of nursing care. And it's a cliff. Dementia
Yes.
is a cliff. So then it goes from half a day of nursing care to she needs to be in a nursing home. And then we realized we put her in the wrong nursing home and they really didn't have the kind of top-notch dementia care that we wanted for her. So then moving her to another place. And I learned ultimately we lost her in July of 2020 during a very difficult time to lose an elder in a nursing home because we were
Mm,
not allowed in after COVID. And she had dementia. We asked the staff to do FaceTime calls, and she was asking us, why are the Martian men here? I mean, they had on the plastic
oh,
covers for the germs, and she thought they were Martians. She was afraid all the time. I mean,
mm,
don't get me started on COVID because I think that in a lot of ways, that was the death of the America that we knew. And we're now living in a post-apocalyptic world since COVID. It has taken so much from this country, but that's a discussion for another time. So I want to focus a little bit more on grief and what it actually is. This is not something I made up. Um, and it's not something that I would be able to articulate from her firsthand experience, but there is something called the grief brain. The grief brain is defined as when you are overloaded with grief, sadness, or loneliness. And it is proven scientifically that the grief brain affects your memory, concentration, and cognition. So that bears repeating. The
Yeah,
grief
because the
brain,
amygdala takes it as a trauma event. And so the
yes.
brain is trying to protect you. And then there's actually some swelling that takes place, and there is memory loss and the ability to process and do things. And so people use the term grief fog, grief wave, but there is actually a scientifically proven, as you're talking about, that and that is why people have to they serve themselves better if they pace themselves. If you start identifying what to eliminate from your schedule, everything now does not have to be done because you literally do not oftentimes have the mental capacity. Life does continue. And going back to the community, there are people, sometimes people have individuals in their lives that will take some of the weight off of them, but you have to convey that to them. So thank you for mentioning that because that part in how the brain functions is something we need to be aware of whether we are the person grieving or not, so that when we see our person behaving out of sorts, it's like there's a real reason for this. It is the sadness, those stages of grief, but it's also what the body does naturally to when you have a traumatic event, that fight or flight, and what that looks like is some different ways that grief impacts the body. So thank you for mentioning that.
Um, I picked that up from hospice.com website, so I want you to know I'm not making that up. I did some research in preparation for this. I will tell you my personal experience in dealing with your loss of Mark was that the first time I went to your house after he passed, we sat out on that little porch that you had
Oh,
there,
yes.
and you were in an absolute shock. And that shocked me because you were always large and in charge, retired Army. Here comes Tina, super mom. Everybody straighten up
Mm.
when Tina walks in the room. And, that's yes, ma'am. I mean, this is how you were, which is what I loved about you. But I came home and I told my husband, I said, it's bad. It's bad. It's bad. She's in real shock and she is fragile like an eggshell.
And thank
And
you for mentioning that because so many people see me right now. They see this part, and I'm like, that's not what I looked like then. I looked like somebody that knew how to stare off into space.
yes,
And there was and it I think and you mentioned it so well, it scared my friends because it was like I have never seen her
right,
like this is really bad. And thank you because that is the reality of it.
yeah. And you literally were sitting on that porch just staring into the distance. And I mean, even your home and your environment, I said to my husband, everything was always just so in her home, but things are in disarray, which is another
Yes.
signal to me that she is not doing well.
And that is important because I love that you and what you didn't do, you didn't try to fix it. You
Right,
didn't try to come in and go, okay, the house is a mess. This is this. You were like, okay.
right,
And what you said is what I try to tell people. You sat with me right where I was.
right,
And that was good enough. You love me. I see my friend, and I'm just going to be here with her because you can't make Mark come back. You can't do
right,
that. But
right,
what people can do is be there and just sit and understand this is what it looks like and just be there with them.
right.
Yes.
And I remember asking you if I could clean your house, not on that occasion, but later. And I think you declined. And I just had to say, totally fine. Do you want me to hire someone to come in here? Nope. Because in your mind, you wanted to do it your way, or you and the kids were going to do it. And I don't know what piles of paper are what. And of
Yes.
course, at that time, we're already worried about Mark's bills. What's the probate process? The dining room table's got papers and bills. Don't touch anything. And it was like, totally fine. I think the first time I asked you to go on a walk in your neighborhood, because you were in that like real nice flat neighborhood, all these little streets connected to walk. And it was like, nope, you didn't have the energy. And it was like totally fine. So you have to meet the person where they're at.
Yes.
So let's go back to what I said. The grief brain has compromised memory, concentration, and cognition, because that's going to play into what I'm about to say, because I'm going to move into the legal part. So there are three, they traditionally talk about the three C's, letter C of grieving. And you basically spoke about this a few minutes ago. You didn't use letter C words, but you spoke about this. The three letter C words are choose, connect, and communicate. You used community. So choose is choose, if you're going through a grief process, choose carefully who you spend your time with and how you spend your time.
Mm.
Don't try to entertain friends. If you're getting a bad vibe from them or not the right vibe, then you don't spend time with them right now. Connect and reach out with friends or with support groups. Connect to your church. If you can't find a support group, I know you can talk to a priest or your pastor. And if you have not been part of a church, it might be a good time to think about joining one to get through this process at a minimum.
And I'll say
And
that
then
we have a support group that meets twice a month. The second Thursday of the month, we have a men's only support group. And the last Thursday of the month, I host a support group. That's all. You can find that on Eventbrite, or you can go to our website, widowhoodrealtalkwithtina.org, select events, and the support group is right there.
excellent, excellent. I'm glad to hear that. And then communicate. The third C is communicate, which is, communicate with whoever you get the right energy from. What are some ways of, oh, excuse me, what are the unhealthy ways of dealing with grief? And unfortunately, these are common ways that you see people dealing with grief: denial, isolation, and drinking or drugs. And
And you're meaning to the amount of being assessed, being over the, my mouth isn't working, being excessive with it. I mean, yeah, we drank wine and I reeled in, but it's like when that goes on for a long period of
right,
time where that becomes your main coping skill,
right.
that is when it becomes very dangerous.
Yeah. I think we had one glass of wine. We've always been pretty moderate.
And yeah, because we're not drinkers, so it didn't take much to be like, okay, we're staying home.
Yeah. But there's a lot of people, and people like to generalize and say it's the men that are in denial. It's also women that are in denial.
Yes.
It's men and women that isolate themselves because they're so afraid of how do I get back into social life. And it's men and women that drink or do drugs. So not a good idea. What are some healthy ways to remove grief from your body? And again, this is not my suggestion. This is out there in the medical community. Counseling. I would always recommend counseling. If you're someone that has a wall up about counseling, try journaling. I do know a couple of men that are very reluctant with counseling, but they're willing. If I hand them a blank journal, I have a gift for you after the passing of your relative, they will journal, which I think, you don't have the help of the professional, the back and forth, but it helps. Yoga helps, walking helps, and dancing helps. You can dance in your home with nobody watching.
I
So,
want to add to that, Michelle, that those are all really good tips. I'm not quite sure if one would totally remove grief from from themselves, but it would give them the capacity to learn how to manage the grief. Because when that loved one dies, that is the biggest thing in your life. It consumes every moment, every instance. And those coping skills that you mentioned helps you regain your life and start making your life bigger than what that instance of the grief. And it starts helping your brain to start having the capacity to recall the memories of the love. Because for such a period of time, all you remember is they died in that death, in that horrible moment of it. And you can't even remember the love or recall the good times. And those things that you mentioned will help you to start managing the grief and be able to house it differently and be able to start reclaiming your life. I think at some point there will always be a part of that grief that will be with you, so it may never totally be removed, but
Right.
it definitely will give you the ability to manage and house it differently.
Good point. And that's a point to be made by someone who's been through it in a way I have not. So thank you for clarifying that.
Oh, you're welcome. Thank you for those points. Those are really solid uh, advice.
So, maybe some of your listeners still have their spouse with them, and maybe some of your listeners have lost someone older. Maybe they've lost their parent or an in-law, and it's got them thinking, what are the things legally that I should be doing to get organized and
Yes.
prepare for my own eventual passing or that of my spouse? So now I want to segue a little bit into the legalities of it all. I certainly recommend everyone prepare a last will and testament. If your last will and testament is an opportunity for you to put in writing who should get what. If you're in a married couple, typically husband leaves everything to wife, wife leaves everything to husband. If they have children, there's a paragraph that says, in the event we die together, car accident is the most common way, then to the children. Um, what happens if you don't have a last will and testament? Every jurisdiction has an intestacy law, which says the priority of who gets what. And almost every state, it's if the person's married, their spouse gets everything. And it goes through a hierarchy. If they're not married, if they're married with children, if they're married and have children, not all of whom are also their children. That's a reference to blended families. So more and more reasons to do some planning and some thinking. So find a reliable, reasonably priced, trustworthy trust and estate lawyer in your jurisdiction. Ask your friends who they use to prepare their will, and ask for a short 10-minute consultation on the phone and see if you get a good feeling from the person, and then make an appointment in person. You shouldn't be rushed through the process. Your questions should be answered.
Michelle, I have a
Uh,
question on that as
yes,
it relates to the state of Pennsylvania.
yes.
And so let me be clear, the question is in relation to the state of Pennsylvania. Are you able to expound on how the state of Pennsylvania deals with same-sex common partners or domestic partners that did not have a legal marriage, and how that would look as far as an instance of one of them passing?
Yes, so we have legalized same-sex marriage, which to have legal recognition of your relationship is really significant. And I have a lot of neighbors and acquaintances that have been in a long-term relationship, whether they're same-sex or opposite sex, and they don't want to be married. They may have sort of an anti-government feeling, a little bit more different, kind of what we used to say hippie-ish
Mhm.
counterculture. But I try to explain to them there are significant legal benefits to being married. And that's definitely true in the state of Pennsylvania, which I'm going to get into. So the number one benefit is if you're with someone a real long time and you've purchased real estate together, you've acquired assets together. In Pennsylvania, we are one of only 6 states in America that imposes a taxation on death. We tax the event of dying. So that means there's an inheritance tax.
Oh,
Some
okay.
people call it a state death tax. Now, and I'm kind of jumping ahead here, but I'll get into it because your question addresses this. If you are in a couple and you're not married and your boyfriend or girlfriend dies, you're going to pay a significant estate tax. I think it's 12%. If you're married, it's 0%.
Okay.
If two married people die together in a car accident at the same time and they've left everything to their children, then it's 4.5% death tax due to the state of Pennsylvania Department of Revenue, and it's due 9 months from the date of death. If there are two married people, be they same sex or not, The first one who dies does not owe inheritance tax, but they have to prepare the tax return and file it because Harrisburg wants to know what they own. So it's really just giving Harrisburg an inventory of what the assets are. Then when the second person dies, that inheritance tax becomes due. That's really why in Pennsylvania, you really need a lawyer upon death, definitely of the second person, and sometimes upon death of the first person. And that gets into probate and what the process is. Let me back up for was that helpful?
Yes, thank you very much.
Okay, so let's go back for a minute to the last will and testament. The other reason to do that is that you could name your executor or executrix. Typically, if you're married, that's going to be your spouse. And that's the person that's going to meet with the lawyer upon the death of the other person. You can name a guardian for your children. If you and your spouse die together and you have minor children, I tell people all the time, if you have children, you need to meet with me and we need to get your will done. Even if you're renting and you don't own a home, you want to name your guardian. Who's going to raise your children? We don't want to leave that decision to the state. So that's important. And then the wishes for your last bodily remains. You get to identify, do you want burial? Do you want cremation? Some people today are adamant, I don't want a service because if they're not religious and they don't want the money spent on it. They feel their estate's going to be very small and they don't want the money spent. So you can identify a service to be held at the convenience of my family if they so desire. On the other side, if you're very involved in your church, you're a pastor in your church, I want the service to be held here at my home church. You can identify that. You can go into incredible detail in a will. You can have an outfit, but your spouse isn't going to know that unless you say, this is the outfit, it's on the hanger. My mother-in-law identified a photo. It was an 8x10 glossy photo that she had taken during her Mary Kay days. This is the photo. She told my husband, this is the photo. Make sure you use this photo because I have my hair and makeup done. So those are the types of details that you can communicate with your spouse right now. What would you want once you have children? If you have children, what are the elements of raising your children that are really important to you? These are communications that we often don't think about having. If something happened and I'm crossing the railroad tracks and I don't see that train coming, maybe I should say to my husband, now that we have kids, it's very important to me that you take them to church, be involved in a church. I want them to have religion in their upbringing. Or if you're an atheist, I don't want them going to church. I mean, there are atheists that are out there and active. I want the kids to go to private school. I want the kids to go to parochial school. I want the kids to be homeschooled, whatever it is. How would your spouse know? And I'll tell you, I have a friend, a man who lost his wife very suddenly when she was like 34 years old, and they had two young boys, 3 and 5. And I recently told him I was doing this podcast. I have 4 or 5 friends that I asked for advice, all of whom lost someone very, very close. And he said, I never got to talk to her about raising the kids and what was important to her. And he says, and I wish I did that. He said, and then also I found out after she died that she was hiding and stashing cash in case of emergency. But he says her mother told me she was hiding and stashing cash, but I never found it. And we think it was about $10,000.
Those are really good points, and I talk about that with people, having those conversations about what your significant other wants. It takes the pressure off in so many different ways. Mark and I spoke about that he wanted to get cremated. He spoke about where he wanted some of his ashes to be done. We talked about if he left this world early, about what my life would look like in continuation, whether that was economically, if I were to redate and married. Those are difficult conversations to have, but they were so necessary because then when he passed at 51, I wasn't having to second guess myself. about things that he needed, or because you want to honor your loved one and you want
Mhm.
to do those last things that you feel like they wanted and make sure that
Right.
you upheld their wishes. But if you never knew, you have no concept. We had legal guardians placed for our children, identified their godparents, and that they would also be the executor of our estates if we both passed. So having those things in place, having a will in place, naming each other paid on death for, and having conversations. What do you need economically if I'm no longer here that you can continue a quality of life? Having those things in place is a game changer.
Oh, yeah. And it was still difficult as it was, but you had a lot of preparation in place. So imagine if you had no preparation in place.
Mm,
Um, so let's go back to the list we talked about last will and testament. Maybe you and your partner should talk about establishing a trust. Maybe you do have assets. Maybe you own a home. Maybe you own a vacation home. Maybe you own a rental property. Maybe you have two rental properties, multiple dwelling properties, income coming in from the properties. Maybe you should have a trust. Now, I don't prepare trusts, but I have a professional relationship with lawyers locally where I could refer someone to them if the client needs a trust. And I just did that this week. So revocable versus irrevocable trusts. Revocable trust means you can change your mind and you can take assets out of it and you can change who's going to be the beneficiary of that. Irrevocable means you lose a lot of control, but you also have benefits in terms of Medicare planning. You could have your spouse go to a nursing home if they need skilled nursing care, and you won't be forced to sell your home because your spouse doesn't actually own the house. The trust does because you've prepared a written trust document, you've signed it, and then you've deeded your house to the trust. We're in a time today where I see sort of a backlash against lawyers. I do see certainly on social media, right? We all have information, immediate access to information, which is good and bad, but we have to know when we're not expert enough and could benefit from the expertise of someone else. So half the people that I speak to each week, their legal problem was made much worse because they tried to take steps on their own,
mm,
unadvised by a lawyer.
okay.
So that's why I do encourage people to find a lawyer they trust. How about a living will? Have you and your spouse discussed what would happen? I mean, Mark had a sudden and dramatic heart attack. Um, I have other friends whose spouse died from an illness, a long illness, course of illness, MS, cancer, Alzheimer's, dementia, Lou Gehrig's disease. The list goes on and on. COVID. Um, do you want to be put on a breathing machine? This was all prompted in each of the states. Every state adopted a law, and it was basically prompted by the woman Terry Schiavo in Florida, who was a young mother put on breathing apparatus, and her husband felt that he and she had talked, and she wouldn't want to live in a coma in a vegetative state, but her parents did not want that equipment disconnected. So now almost all states have a law that allows you to select now while you're healthy and able. Do you want to be attached to machines? If, and that only comes into play in Pennsylvania, if you're already in the process of dying. So the living will isn't even shown to the doctors or brought out unless you're at the end of stage 4 cancer. We've done all the treatments, the clinical trials, or you've been hit by a bus crossing the road, massive head injury, a vegetative state, maybe been in a coma for weeks or months, and then the doctor's saying, there's really nothing more I can do. And it's a time again where a spouse is almost in a grieving process. Their partner's still here, but they're really not capable of making that decision. So I encourage people to prepare a living will.
You make a good point, Michelle, because we were in Delaware when Mark had the heart attack, but Mark had a living will. We both had that already drawn up. And I remember as the night was going on, one of the doctors coming to me, and I said, he does have a living will. Obviously, I don't have it with me because we were on vacation. But having that foreknowledge, I knew that I was making decisions that were fine with him and exercising his desire. And when the doctor asked me, I could speak on what he wanted and what he
Exactly.
didn't want. And that just, oh, the pressure that it took off of me and not having to say what if, wondering if I made the right decision, if I did that. He eventually just coded so many times and expired naturally. I didn't have to evoke any of those things. But knowing that already was a really good decision that we made in our marriage. And I'm glad that we did. And I do recommend people another one of those hard conversations, but so essential and to have. We talk about so many things in a marriage. We need to talk about things like that that will matter a lot later.
It's difficult to bring those things up. I assume I prepared the living will and we had that conversation in my office.
Probably, I don't re yeah, because it was with the will and everything else, but we were just very adamant about wanting to have those things in place because it's not if something happens, the reality is just when. And the
Right.
more that you have in place, like you said, it's that anticipatory grief where you're already leaning in and then trying to make these heavy decisions and your mind is getting cloudy. It's better to have those documents written up and drawn so you know what the person wants.
And I see situations frequently where someone is in a coma, they've slipped into a coma, and I might get a phone call from their spouse saying to me, his adult kids from the first marriage don't want to let me disconnect him from life support. But I know he didn't want to be on life support. I mean, you can avoid those situations by filling out a living will.
Okay, I want to pause for one moment and for the editing team. Something happened where now I'm only seeing part of your face, so I want you to adjust your camera or something because it's starting to cut you off. Okay, cool.
Is
Very
that
good.
better? Okay.
Yeah, thank you. Thank you,
So
editing team.
another thing for you to discuss with your partner, prepare, just take out a blank piece of paper and write down all the account numbers,
Yes.
all the bank accounts. And nowadays, because of fraud, they're saying it's best to not do it on your computer. They're actually saying take out a pen and paper, and you need to both know where that's being kept. So accounts, account numbers, passwords. I mean, many people do not know all of the assets that their spouse has. It's not because they're being secretive. It's because they're good at saving and they open this account here. Oh, I have a little retirement here. Oh, I left the job 10 years ago, but there's still an IRA there. And you might not even know it. Life insurance. I am a big fan of life insurance as an estate planning tool. And this is very helpful in a blended family. People will come to me. I have all of my kids from before my wife. All of my kids are from before my wife. She and I don't have kids together because we got married at 48. We got married at 52. We don't have any kids together. I love life insurance as a planning tool because I can say to him, then are you healthy? You still have no diagnoses, especially if you're a non-smoker. You can sit on your laptop and go on AARP or other websites and you can buy life insurance today. Buy a life insurance policy for however much you can afford the premiums on, term life, and name your kids.
Yes.
We can do your will separately. Now I know your kids are going to get something.
And
And
you're
we can
right.
and we can say in your will, I have these children. I love them all equally. Because my wife and I live in the house together, I've chosen to provide for them through life insurance. Now, pay your premiums every year and don't let that policy lapse.
You speak literally to my situation. I mean, Fred and I, we got married in our 50s. This body is not doing that anymore. So, what I have already decided, what he decided for his children, we laid all that out. We went to a lawyer, laid all those different things out. So, you don't want it to be messy when the inevitable happens. And then the
Mhm.
more that you can lean in and stop the family bickering and all those different things, and we've let all our children know this is what we've laid out upon our demise. These are the things that are already identified, what it is. This is what he had before we got married. This is what I had before we got married. Those will go to our children. And once again, those very difficult conversations, but they're necessary. We did all that just about a week or so before getting married, or maybe just afterwards, just to make sure it was laid out and done.
Mm,
Because I'm in this situation because we don't stay. I don't need to make it messy later.
right. Exactly. Excellent point. So, first year, let's talk about first 6 to 12 months after you have a significant person in your life pass away. My point, if you take nothing else away from this podcast, is try not to make any big moves or decisions. Try not to make any big moves or decisions. And I know Tina's gonna talk to this in a minute. And I'm gonna be specific here. Don't sell your house and move away in the first 6 months. Do not add your children to your house deed. Do not do that. Especially don't do that if they're minors. And let me tell you why. A minor cannot sign a deed to convey a house away. So if you get, see what happens when we lose someone, especially suddenly, death has come into our family. All those crazy images with he's wearing the hood and he's right here. And you get very protective of your children, rightfully so. You get scared. What can I do? I can't tell you how many people go to a lawyer or they do it themselves. And I don't know why any lawyer would do it. Add a minor child to the house deed. Now, if your circumstances change, what if you get sick? What if you can't work? Your income gets cut. Now I need to sell my house and I need to move in with a relative. Oh, but wait, my minor child who I added to my deed, I can't sell that house because my child can't sign the deed. So now I need a court order to sell my house. You've just made your problems worse. So you could choose legally to put your house into a trust if you're going to stay in it for some time and name your children as the beneficiaries of the trust. But I suggest you don't make any complicated big moves or legal decisions right away. If you can stay put, get your counseling, reach out to your friends, move through the process. Do not gift your assets. For some reason, when death comes to our house, it makes us very aware, oh my God, I'm not getting out of here alive. I need to gift this house to someone. Maybe there's someone in your family who has played a protective role, who's a very smart person. Let's say I have Uncle Fritz, my Uncle Fritz, and he's a lawyer. Uncle Fritz knows all. He has the best intentions of the family. I no longer have my spouse. You know what? I'm just going to deed my house to Uncle Fritz. Why? Because everything will work out. He will know what to do. No, don't do that. Don't do that. That has tax implications.
Yes.
Don't gift assets away. Do not move out of state. Do not pay off the debts of the person who died.
So the idea, I want to just reiterate something Michelle said, and those are such extremely helpful things to consider. I want you to go back to where she said she had a friend that was a high functioning individual. That was me. Could do multiple things at one time and chew bubble gum and walk and all of that. Mark died, and I was a shell of myself,
Yes.
a shell. And
Yes.
everybody's grief journey is going to be different, but the closer that person is to you, the more impactful it is. If I thought to make major life decisions, I would have been doing it with my least capacity, and my decisions would not have been crystal clear. And that
Bingo.
is why
Bingo.
people are saying, and you hear often, I really don't recommend that you make decisions in the first year. So going back to the igla and the brain, that trauma state that you're in for that first year, and everybody's different. It could be 6 to 9 to 12, 18 months. You may find after that 6th to 9th month, you start going, oh, okay. It's sort of like when you're in a plane and your ear pops, and then you get out and it's like, oh, I can hear better. You start seeing yourself come out of that fog somewhere between the 6th to 9th month going into 18 months where your body is no longer in that trauma state. So your brain capacity is coming back. So now the idea of why you would want to wait a year or so is not because you're all better and the grief is gone. It's just that the trauma part that your brain reacted to, that your capacity to make logical, concise thoughts is starting to be regained. There are some people that unfortunately are situations where their spouse dies, they no longer have the finances to maintain the mortgage. There may have not been life insurance. So you're in a situation because of life that you may have to sell your property because you don't want to lose it. You don't have any other means. But if you have the capacity to stay put and to not make major life decisions, scientifically based on what your brain is doing, it will serve you better to be able to wait that time out. And you may be going, what did Tina do? It was about 18 months, and then I relocated from Pennsylvania to Virginia. I actually still maintain the properties that we had there, I wanna say until I was here about a year or so, because you know what? I may have gotten here and decided it was a mistake, and I wanted to go back to
Wow.
Pennsylvania. So, I didn't totally disconnect from everything. I gave myself some time to confirm. I was pretty sure it was a good decision. My sister was here, and I lived here before, but it was so difficult to leave friends that I've had for years, but it was the snow and that that just made it difficult. So really, if you're thinking about it, look up what the things that are happening in your body as it relates to grief and how it's impacting your cognitive skills.
And you made a very good point, Tina, that not everybody is in the same financial situation. And thank you for that. There certainly are people who have immediate financial pressure. Again, this is why I'm a fan of life insurance. Get it now while you're healthy and alive, to protect your spouse, because it can change everything for your spouse, everything. But there are a lot of people really struggling right now financially, people
Yes.
working 2 and 3 jobs, both of them just to pay their mortgage. And if you're in that situation and your spouse passes, you need to speak to a lawyer all the more. I don't care if it's a financial aid lawyer. I still believe that there are plenty of good private lawyers who will give a significant free consult. I do that every week. And so if you're in Pennsylvania in that situation, you can certainly contact me. If you're in another state, it's possible I could help you find someone. But going back to the point that I made about do not pay off the debts, I do want to clarify
Yes.
that the minute the person dies, then we start talking about his or her estate and what's in their estate. Now, if you live in the marital home with that person and that home is deeded jointly in Pennsylvania, that becomes the property of the widow or the widower immediately. And it's free from claims of creditors. Okay. However, there's plenty of people that are in a second marriage. They married, say it's a woman, she married a man, he owned the house prior. They never changed the deed. Now creditors can go after that house. And in some states, if he passes, she's forced to start a probate action right away because that asset was in his name only. She's got to take steps to file a probate, which is the legal process of getting the assets of the person who passed away distributed to the appropriate parties. And part of that process is getting the debts paid off. But I will tell you that I'm not concerned about the decedent's debts. I am concerned about the mortgage. If there's a mortgage on the house and there's someone living in the house, then yes, the mortgage is going to have to be handled. If the mortgage is in his name only, she's probably going to have to refinance, or she could contact that lender and ask to have the mortgage put in her name. They'll ask to see proof of her income and things like that. But if there's a house with no mortgage, that's a pure asset. She needs to get that house into her name. What I don't care about are the credit cards in his name. They can wait. They can wait for payment. It takes at least a month or two for the lawyer to figure out what were his assets, what were his debts. Now, if you as the widow want to distribute the debts to yourself because that's what the will says should happen, she should get it all, then you do eventually have to deal with his debts and the creditors who file claims.
Mm.
And that varies by state, but in general, that's true. You can't start deeding properties to yourself or retitling the car to yourself if there are debts and claims being made in the probate case. You will eventually have to deal with it. But what you don't have to do is you don't have to answer the creditor's phone calls.
Yes.
It's one of the benefits of having a lawyer. Just do not answer that. And if what they're leaving, the message you're leaving in itself can be upsetting to you, pick
Yes.
up the phone and hang it back down. Press on your cell phone, accept, and then hang it up. I don't care that that's rude. At that point, it's you're preserving yourself. And I'll give you an example. Because again, going back to my friends that I consulted, we talked about Bob, who lost his wife suddenly at age 32. He had 2 boys. His wife was hiding cash just as an emergency fund, and they never found it. Another friend, Marcia, who's really disturbed by the phone calls.
Oh,
Um, right before Christmas this year, her only child, her 31-year-old daughter, died of a heart attack. She died 3 weeks after having COVID, and she had autoimmune disease, and they don't know
oh,
if that is connected. They don't know if her heart was weakened by the autoimmune disease and maybe impacted by COVID. She had a couple of credit cards and a car loan, and these creditors will not stop calling. So I told my friend, and actually they live in Virginia. I said, just do not take the calls. I said to her husband, I said, I want you to intervene. When you hear that call coming in, pick it up and hang it down. They still have a landline. Pick it up and hang it down. Or I said, if you're going to get a lawyer, which I recommend you do, just pick it up and say, this is my lawyer's name and number. Stop calling the house. The car loan is so not important when you just lost your 31-year-old daughter.
correct.
To me, I understand that they're doing the business of trying to collect their debt, but they're going to start calling really quickly, and it's not pleasant. It's not pleasant. Um, so just a couple words about the probate process. I explain what that is. It's the legal process of trying to get the assets collected and then debts paid eventually, and then the assets distributed out. And if you live in a state that applies inheritance tax, that happens simultaneously in that first year. The states that impose a tax upon death are Pennsylvania, New Jersey, Maryland, Kentucky, Nebraska, and Iowa. Probate's a complicated process. There's thousands of dollars to be saved if the lawyer knows what they're doing. There's deductions in the inheritance tax process. There's thousands of dollars to be lost if you think that you're being smart by doing it yourself. If you can afford a lawyer, and if your loved one had assets, you can afford a lawyer. If you don't have the cash up front to pay them, you can ask them to prepare a retainer letter detailing the payment terms and say, I will pay you $1,000 now if you have $1,000, and then let's agree on how the balance is paid later once I receive the assets. And usually they will agree to that.
wow, that's nice. I didn't know that. Thank you, Michelle. That's
Yeah.
good to know.
Now, this section of my notes is called the afterlife, not that kind of afterlife. But what about when you begin to live your life again? What about what happens when you meet someone? If you're blessed and lucky enough to meet someone that you fall in love again, like Tina, my only advice is go ahead and live your life. This goes back to no one's getting out of here alive. Your spouse who passed would not want you to live the rest of your life lonely and in misery. If you have already had one incredible spouse who then has died before you and now comes into your life another wonderful person, go ahead and take advantage of that and participate in the happiness.
And I'll say this, and this is from, like you said, some of this, theoretically, I know from personal experience and just dealing with a lot of people who are grieving. That goes back to having those difficult conversations in the relationship. Mark and I spoke about what we wanted for each other if we pass or who passed first. So I didn't have to have a guilt about, well, maybe I'm not honoring him. Maybe I don't look like a good widow or a good wife if I got remarried. We had the conversation. And getting remarried or recoupling may not be for everyone. Some people feel like they've had one love of their life and that's sufficient.
Mhm.
Another thing also I have seen that there are economical reasons why people will not get remarried. They may
Mm.
lose their spouse's retirement. The person
Mhm.
that they're considering being with doesn't have the economic base to maintain their quality of life. You could lose their social security, you could lose their retirement. There's a certain age that afterwards you wouldn't lose this social security. But I've spoken with people, sometimes you're a military, you may be a gold star widow, where if you remarried, you would no longer receive that income. So those conversations about remarrying after your spouse dies is beyond sometimes just the idea of what does happiness look like for me. It's also about what is going to be my financial position. Some
Exactly.
people may not have the mental capacity to think about, I want to subject myself to another spouse dying. I know that was something I had to wrestle with. But at the end of it, I came to the conclusion I had more love to receive and more love to give. And that's why it was a good decision that worked for me. I worked outside of the home. I had my own financial position that wasn't leveraged on something that I was relying on that Mark had done a retirement. So that put me in a different place. I'm not retirement age, so I wasn't drawing anybody's social security, but it is a holistic conversation. So I recommend that you speak with your financial advisor, speak with
Yes.
a trusted family or friend member that is a confidant, your lawyer, and lay out all those things as it relates to if you were to get remarried, how that would impact your life.
Excellent point. You said what I was going to say, which is maybe if you find the second love of your life, maybe there's reasons for you to just live together. Maybe there's reasons for you to just live near each other and be blissful boyfriend and girlfriend. But you really won't know that until you slow down, collect data that you're going to research any important decision, your trusted friend, your financial person, your tax person, your lawyer, and maybe your pastor. I don't know how many people you would include in that decision, but excellent point, Tina. Thank you. You know that being a lawyer, I have to throw out this piece of advice. If you're going to get married second time around, and if you have your own assets or you inherited assets from your spouse, you want to talk to your lawyer about a prenuptial agreement. I would be
It
remiss. I
did
would
it,
be remiss if I didn't say it. Okay.
and we did, and we did. That is exactly what we did because we're not 12. I mean, Mark, when we got married, I purchased a Dodge Colt. We had a $500 rebate, and that was the honeymoon money. I'm a totally different position in life.
Right.
And if you're dating someone and you bring up the idea of the prenup that Michelle just mentioned and they reel back, I consider that a red flag. I consider that something that if you cannot understand that, yes, I love you, we're going to get remarried. This is not a prenup because I think the marriage isn't going to last. This is a prenup that you put in place upon one of your demises, that your assets are lined out to who is going to receive them, which may be your own children
Right.
or family members that have nothing to do with the marriage. And
Right.
that is just so critical. I left my primary life insurance to my children and my nieces. We have different life insurance that at this point would just be to cover the service and some very minor things. When Mark and I got married, we were trying to set each other up for to be able to maintain a quality of life after
Right.
one of us passing. At this age, that's not something that my spouse and I are looking to do, but we're trying to make sure upon our demise, it doesn't create a burden for the other
Right.
person and they can continue to live their life. In the prenup, it was never something I would have ever thought or considered with Mark. It wasn't necessary. But on this second round of life and where I'm at, totally, absolutely necessary.
Thank you. And a lot of us, the first time we got married, we really didn't have anything. So prenup was kind of silly, right? But then,
Exactly.
but then if you've lost your spouse and you're middle-aged, that's a different scenario. And it's a very personal thing, but I have to throw it out there. I am a lawyer. Um, Two other friends that I have that I mean, so many people in my close circle have lost someone. And this opportunity today really got me thinking about that. And I did reach out and discuss with each one of them and got their permission to mention to you. My neighbor and new friend Mara lost her husband to MS after a lengthy illness battle at age 45. They had
Mm.
adopted two young children. And at the time, she said that having two young children at the time she became a widow really helped her because that was what forced her when she heard the first child cry each morning. You throw off the blankets, you put your feet on the floor, you put your robe on, and you go see what they need, and the day starts. And so that was this experience. Maura and my friend Bob both had young children and said that is its own way of, yes, it's more difficult, but it also helps and makes it easier because you have a reason to get up and keep going.
And you're right. People have to find their reason why, because our spouse, and I do understand that every marriage was not a good marriage. There are some people that were in domestic violence. There were some people that were in a very abusive relationship. And when their spouse died, it actually was unfortunately relief that they did not have to endure that hardship. But people in different situations that you did everything with your spouse. I remember it being just difficult just to say Tina without saying Tina and Mark because
Right.
everything was together and struggling because Catherine and Mark were adults. I mean, Catherine and Alexander were adults and they were out of the house. So I was left there by myself in this home and I struggled to try to find my why and my purpose and that motivation. Was I able to grieve openly throughout the house all by myself? Yes. But having those small children, I can see how that creates such a motivation and a
Yes.
reason for why and just help you continue to live because it pulls you into life again.
Yeah. My friend and neighbor Mike, on the other hand, lost his only son to a suicide
Mm,
during his son's first year of college. And he does have two daughters. He has a second marriage and has stepchildren. So he has, four daughters, but lost his only son to suicide. And he was in a financial situation where he was able to hire my services immediately. And his advice was get a lawyer that you trust immediately and don't try to do anything legal in that first 6 to 12 months. And he recognizes that he's a cardiologist, so he was in a financial situation that he could do that. He did one thing that was sort of a legal event, and he did it right away within like the first 2 weeks. He established a significant scholarship at his son's college to benefit other students. And I'm advised that every year a couple of students benefit from that scholarship fund, which is invested in earning money. And he receives notes from the students talking
um,
about their progress and how they appreciate the assistance. Not everybody can do that, but you know, if you can't establish a significant scholarship fund, maybe you can do $1,000 scholarship at the community college. It can be something similar, but on a much smaller scale, which still impacts people. You certainly can plant a tree in your loved one's remembrance. You can donate a tree to a park and really do something that will carry on. So I think this sort of concludes what I wanted to talk about today, Tina, unless you have questions that you think would benefit the audience. But I really appreciate the opportunity you've provided me with to address your listeners. And we miss you in Pennsylvania.
oh, now she's gonna make me cry again. That was beautiful, Michelle. I will have this shameless plug that Widowhood Real Talk with Tina, you can donate directly to us. And our goal within by 2025 is to create a scholarship fund. And that scholarship fund is because when someone loses a spouse, their life is often changed. And you talked about how difficult people are dealing with financial challenges that they may have to obtain a upgrade in their job. They may need re-educating. They may not be able to afford for their children to go to school anymore because of the missing of that spouse's income. And the donations that we make, our goal is to be able to help people in those financial burdens, to be able to give a scholarship for someone going back to school or for their children, or to be able to help during the holidays when finances are really crunched and people are trying to buy gifts for their children. So that is something that we do. And you can go to widowhoodrealtalkwithtina.org. You can make donations there. You can also text us directly. You can email me. So those things are available. You covered a lot of great information. I know we stuck to the idea that a lot of things are Pennsylvania, and people need to go to their local state and their lawyer to get the details worked out. I do want to ask the significance of this picture in the back that you have over there. What
That
is that about? The painting?
this
Yes,
one.
yes.
So, I recently met a woman younger than me. I would say she's a young woman. I don't know if she's 40 yet. She's probably
Mhm.
40. She started as a client and is now actually residing in one of my rental properties. She has a daughter who's a teenager, and her daughter painted this picture, and they were in the process of moving, and she was discarding it and thinking that she was going to put it at the end of the driveway for trash. I thought it was beautiful. It's a young woman sitting with her dog at a sunset, and I just thought it was outstanding. So I asked her if I could have it, and she said absolutely. I was going to get rid of it, throw it away. So I've started painting during COVID, and painting is something that I would, suggest anybody can go and get online lessons like I did and just relax, unwind, use it as an alternative to therapy, play with color. And I never really had any kind of creative streak, but now I'm doing that. And I have one of my small paintings up there above my diploma, just a little sunset piece, just playing with color a little bit.
Wow, I would have thought that someone painted that specifically for you since you love dogs. That's what I thought it was. That it was. I could see that like a visual of you and your dog. Wow, that is exactly.
Our bird dog. So yes, we do love dogs. And in your time of need, rely on your pets,
Yes.
snuggle with your pets. They love you unconditionally. So if anybody thinks I can help with any questions, they can reach out to me. farleylaw01@outlook.com is the best way to reach me. So I have a record and I can search in my inbox and I will respond. If you want me to help find an appropriate lawyer in your jurisdiction, I'll do that as well.
Thank you. I wanted to clarify. So you can text a donation to us by texting Hopeful Hearts to 53555 and
Mhm.
it'll come right up. Text is 53555 and then you put in Hopeful Hearts and you can donate directly to our organization. I have two questions for you, Michelle.
Okay. What's
What
that?
gives you joy?
I mean, my family gives me joy. My husband and my two kids that are precious to me, my dog, my friends, my good friends over the years, like you, Tina.
Wasn't a plug. Thank you. My second question that I ask people, if you could pick any time period in your life, what would you pick and what would you tell Michelle?
I would say in the years when the kids were young and they were doing their basketball and the schedules were frantic, with two kids doing two different basketball schedules and me with a litigation schedule, my husband with a sales management schedule, I would tell myself, don't sweat the small stuff.
Mm,
Nobody cares if laundry's left undone. Nobody cares if for dinner one night you had fast food instead of a home cooked meal. I would say you can't get it all done. Stop trying.
nice, nice. Thank you for being here. I will let you close out this conversation and wrap it up.
Well, I really appreciate the opportunity. I hope that, if your listeners have already lost someone, that they've found some helpful information here. And if they haven't lost someone, and they're just interested in this topic, that they have found some information about planning and moving forward in their own life in a productive way and making some plans for that eventual thing that's going to happen to us all.
Yes, the lawyer is my friend and a longtime friend. I have not spoken to Michelle in so long that I'm grateful that we had the opportunity to catch up and at the same time provide you with very valuable information. I am sorry for the person that you have lost that has driven you to this conversation. but I am glad to be part of your community. I'm glad that you're part of the hood. Please feel free to email me topics at widowhoodrealtalk@gmail.com. Let me know what you want to be covered, or if you want to be able to share your journey here, please let me know. I'll talk to you later. Bye.
Thank you for spending another episode with Widowhood Real Talk. If you found the contents of today helpful, share the episode to anyone you know who may need it. Subscribe to the show and tune into Widowhood Real Talk each week. Then visit widowhood-realtalkwithtina.org to join the community and access additional resources. Remember, you are not alone in this journey.